Josh, one thing you mentioned is that you volunteer time, pro bono time, to help victims of domestic violence. Can you tell us a little bit about why you do that work, and tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so I represent Legal Aid here in Portland. Has a really terrific program set up called the Domestic Violence Project. They recruit lawyers in town who represent oftentimes petitioners and more often than not abused women in domestic violence situations, to represent them in what's a contested hearing on a restraining order. So the petitioner will have already received the restraining order at an ex parte hearing, and then the lawyer comes in to help in a contested hearing versus the respondent. The reasons I've done it, and I've done it now for probably the better part of 7 years, is partially for selfish reasons. I wanted to get into court more, and I wanted to be able to run my own cases and work with clients on my own. But partially because this is just, I mean, it sounds cliche, but it's very, very important work. I mean, these are people who find themselves in, for me, unimaginable circumstances of being subject to abuse and then being dragged into court to have to present their own case to a judge without the assistance of a lawyer. I just can't imagine how that can be done. So it's been really, really rewarding work, and I've gotten to know a lot of great people through doing it over the years.
And what have you learned about access to justice and maybe some of the shortcomings of our system that need to be addressed that relate to diversity as a result of this work that you've done?
Well, there's certainly a lack of access to justice. That's the first thing. The fact that people need to recruit pro bono lawyers who don't do family law, for example, as a career. To do that kind of work speaks volumes about the unavailability of legal services for people in incredibly dire need of a lawyer. I've also learned that there's a lot of challenges for people who go into court either with or without lawyers in terms of the bench not often understanding, I think, the real circumstances that people are living in. Lawyers or opposing parties who abuse the system to further the abuse and intimidate people, which is really troubling. So I just do my best to be able to help shepherd the petitioner through the case and to understand that one way or the other we'll get through it together.
And how will the bar's diversity and inclusion work relieve the pressures on the system or make things better for people?
Well, I think at some level, just the awareness of the issue, just having people who think about diversity and inclusion, the fact that there are people different from them who have different circumstances in lives, who are experiencing different things, just having people aware of that and thinking about it actively is huge. I think people, when they go to court or when they represent their clients, having that in their head is an incredible advantage. And so I think in the larger context of the bar's work, the re-emphasis of that as an important thing for lawyers to do is great and huge.
And tell us, what are some of the key highlights from the first year of the bar's implementation of its diversity action plan?
Yeah, so I know that your office, Marianne, has put out an implementation report, and I'm not sure if that's public yet or not, but when it is, I would encourage bar members to take a look at that. And so in the context of 8 goals with a lot of concrete strategies for implementing those goals, and it's only been 1 year, I think we've accomplished quite a bit. A couple of the things that stick out for me are, first, there's an issue about demographic data of lawyers, knowing who are we in the bar. Are we as diverse as we think we are? Are we as undiverse as we know we are? And just getting good information from which we can gauge those things. And historically, my understanding is that bar members were not required, much less asked, I think, to provide demographic data. And so one of the strategies that was implemented is giving bar members the opportunity and also encouraging them to self-report their demographic data. It's not a requirement, but there's now a tool on the website, I think, where if a bar member logs into their account, they are asked the question, will you provide your demographic data? And it turns out that when people are asked the question, they're more willing to provide it voluntarily. And so as a result, I think we've seen an uptick in reporting, and we've been able to evaluate better the makeup of the bar. Another accomplishment I think is worth mentioning is that OLEO, the great program that your office runs, has expanded the definition of of diversity to allow more students to participate in the program. I think that's right, which of course has resulted in an increase in the number of students participating, but also an increase in the diversity of the students who are participating. And so that's a terrific thing. I know that Olio has a goal of 35% of members passing the Oregon State Bar, and I assume staying in Oregon to practice law, which is ultimately the goal, and that goal actually could be met this year with the February bar. Once those results come out, we're very close to that, and to hit that number would be a pretty great accomplishment. So those are two things I think that stick out for me. And another thing that I personally have experienced is the increasing diversity of the Board of Governors itself, and I think that also spills over into the greater leadership of the bar in terms of executive committees, section involvement, presenters for CLEs, increasing the participation of diverse lawyers in those events. And I know on the BOG we've seen an increase. We've got now, I believe, 3 new members who are former or current leaders of specialty bar organizations, which is a terrific thing, and they've been great additions to the bar.
Well, thank you so much for your service on the Board of Governors, your service on the Diversity Advisory Council, and your service to victims of domestic violence in our community.
Thank you very much.
You.
Appreciate talking to you.